At 15, I stood in a county auction with my brother and a crumpled $10 bill, every cent we had left. When the rusted blue Quonset hut went up for sale, the auctioneer laughed when I raised my hand. "Sold to the kids for $10, he said, like it was the punchline to a joke. What we discovered beneath that peeling metal shell wasn't just land. It was something a billion-dollar corporation would do anything to take from us. If you've ever had to build something from nothing when the world counted you out, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The day my stepfather kicked us out, the world gave me three things. My brother Toby's hand gripping mine, a $10 bill from my aunt's last birthday card, and exactly 72 hours to figure out where two kids could legally exist. It was late August in the Nebraska plains, the kind of August where the heat doesn't break even after sunset, where the horizon stretches so flat and endless it feels like the edge of nothing. We'd been sleeping in the back of a neighbor's shed for 2 nights when I saw the notice stapled to the post office bulletin board. County tax auction, abandoned properties, Saturday, 10 a.m. I was 15 years old. Toby was 12. And in my pocket was a single $10 bill that felt heavier than it had any right to. The auction was held in a parking lot behind the courthouse, a half-dozen people standing around, looking bored while the auctioneer droned through lots nobody wanted. Overgrown plots. Condemned trailers. When he got to lot 47, he didn't even try to sell it. Quonset hut on Route 71, mile marker 843. No utilities, no foundation inspection. Sold as is. He glanced at the rusted blue monstrosity in the photograph pinned to his clipboard. "Who'll give me $50 to haul this eyesore off the county books?" Silence. 25. More silence. Someone laughed. I raised my hand. $10. The auctioneer looked at me like I'd just offered him Monopoly money. He saw my worn sneakers, Toby's too small jacket, the desperation we couldn't hide. His expression shifted, not quite pity, but close. "Sold to the young lady for $10. He shook his head as he said it, like he was signing off on the worst investment in human history. God help you, kid. 3 days later, we stood in front of that massive peeling blue structure, and I realized the auctioneer had been right about one thing. We were going to need all the help we could get. I need to tell you about the night everything ended, because you have to understand what we were running from to understand why that $10 Quonset hut felt like salvation. It was 3 weeks before the auction. August 7th. I remember because it was Toby's 12th birthday, and Mom had promised him laser tag and pizza before she died 2 years earlier. Our stepfather, Derek, had other plans. He'd been drinking since noon, the kind of slow, steady drinking that turned his face red and his words sharp. We lived in a ranch house on the edge of town, the kind with vinyl siding and a 2-car garage that looked like every other house on the block. Derek had moved in when I was 9, and for a while, things were okay. He worked at the grain elevator, came home tired but not mean. After Mom's cancer took her, something in him curdled. We became reminders of a woman he'd loved and lost, and reminders made him angry. That night, Toby made the mistake of leaving his backpack in the hallway. Derek tripped over it coming out of the bathroom. I heard the thud from my room, then his voice rising like a storm rolling in. "How many times do I have to tell you people to pick up your shit?" I was already moving down the hall when I heard Toby's small voice. "Sorry, I forgot." "You forgot. You always forget. You know what? I'm tired of cleaning up after you too. Tired of feeding mouths that aren't even mine." I reached the living room as Derek kicked the backpack across the floor. Toby's math homework scattered like snow. My brother stood frozen, his shoulders hunched in that way he'd learned meant make yourself small, make yourself invisible. "It was an accident," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. "I'll move it." Derek turned to me, and I saw it then, the decision already made, just looking for an excuse to land. "You'll move it? You'll move everything. Both of you. I want you out." The words hung in the air like smoke. Toby looked at me, his eyes going wide. "What?" I said. "You heard me. Out. Tonight." I'm done playing daddy to someone else's kids. You're 15, Stephanie. Old enough to figure it out. It's midnight. Where are we supposed to go? Not my problem anymore. He pulled out his wallet, threw a $10 bill on the coffee table. Here. Birthday present for the kid. Now get your stuff and get out of my house. I wanted to scream at him. Wanted to tell him this was Mom's house first, that he had no right. But Toby was shaking beside me, and I knew if I pushed, Derek would get physical. He'd never hit us, but there was always that edge, that possibility humming beneath his anger. Fine, I said. Give us 20 minutes. We packed in silence. Toby moved through his room like a ghost, grabbing his favorite books, his Nintendo, the photos of Mom he kept in his desk drawer. I took clothes, my aunt's birthday cards from over the years, the emergency cash I'd been saving for my grocery store job, $43 that was now gone, spent on Toby's new school shoes and the electric bill Derek had forgotten to pay. When we walked out that front door with our duffel bags and backpacks, Derek was passed out on the couch, the TV playing late-night infomercials to an empty room. I took one last look at the kitchen where Mom used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings, at the wall where our height marks were still penciled in fading graphite. Then I locked the door from the outside and slipped the key through the mail slot. We slept in Tom Morrison's shed that first night, curled on canvas tarps that smelled like gasoline and cut grass. Toby cried himself to sleep. I stayed awake, that $10 bill folded in my pocket, trying to figure out how you build a life from nothing when you're 15 and responsible for someone who still believes the world is supposed to be fair. The key didn't want to turn. I stood there jiggling it in the rusted padlock while Toby waited behind me, our shadows stretching long across the prairie grass in the late afternoon sun. When the lock finally gave way with a screech of protesting metal, I half expected the whole door to fall off its hinges. It didn't. It swung inward on a groan, and we got our first real look at what $10 bought you in rural Nebraska. The interior was a cavern of blue-tinted darkness, the few windows so crusted with grime they turned the sunlight murky and submarine. The air smelled like rust and earth and something else, something old and metallic that caught in the back of my throat. Our footsteps echoed off the curved, corrugated walls as we stepped inside, the sound swallowed up by the vastness of the space. It was bigger than I'd expected. 40 feet long, maybe 20 wide, the arched ceiling high enough that I couldn't touch it even if I jumped. But bigger didn't mean better. The concrete floor was cracked and stained with oil spots that looked like continents on a forgotten map. In one corner, something had built a nest out of insulation and old newspapers. In another, a stack of water-damaged boxes sagged into themselves like tired old men. Steph. Toby's voice was small. Where are we going to sleep? I looked around, trying to see potential instead of decay. There was a workbench along one wall, its surface littered with tools so rusted they'd fused to the wood. A metal cabinet with one door hanging open. What might have been a wood stove in the far corner, its pipe disconnected, and lying on the floor like a fallen tree. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Let's see what we've got to work with. We spent the next hour exploring. Toby found a battery-powered lantern that actually worked when we put fresh batteries in it. I found a broom with half its bristles missing and started sweeping decades of dirt toward the door. The light coming through the window shifted from gold to orange to that purple-pink color that means you're running out of daylight. That's when we noticed the first leak. It wasn't raining. There hadn't been a cloud in the sky all day. But water was dripping steadily from a seam in the ceiling where two panels of corrugated metal met, landing in a dark stain on the concrete with a rhythmic plink, plink, plink. Condensation, I said, remembering something from science class. The metal gets cold at night. Warm air inside hits it, makes water. So it's going to rain inside? Toby asked. Only kind of. We found 2 more leaks before the sun went down. I positioned our empty duffel bags under them to catch the drips, knowing that by morning they'd be soaked through. We ate gas station sandwiches I'd bought that morning, egg salad that was already starting to smell questionable, and drank from a gallon jug of water that would have to last us until I figured out where the nearest tap was. When full darkness came, it came completely. I'd never experienced quiet like that. No traffic sounds. No neighbors' TVs bleeding through walls. No hum of refrigerators or air conditioners or any of the mechanical heartbeats you don't notice until they're gone. Just wind moving through grass and the occasional creak of metal expanding or contracting in the temperature change. Toby and I made beds out of our jackets on the least dirty section of floor, using our backpacks as pillows. The lantern cast our shadows huge against the curved walls, making the space feel even more cavernous and strange. "Steph," Toby whispered after we'd turned out the light. "Do you think this was a mistake?" I listened to the drip, drip, drip of water hitting canvas. Felt the cold seeping up through the concrete into my spine. Smelled rust and decay and the weight of decades nobody had cared about. "Ask me tomorrow," I said. But I already knew the answer. This wasn't a mistake. It was all we had. We'd been in the blue shell for 5 days when the black sedan pulled up. I was outside trying to figure out the water situation. There was a well pump that looked older than me, rusted solid and probably useless, when I heard tires on gravel. Out here, where the nearest neighbor was 2 miles down a road that barely qualified as a road, the sound of a car was like an alarm going off. The sedan was expensive. I could tell that much even though I didn't know cars. It was the kind of clean that didn't belong on a dirt road, the kind of black that looked like it cost extra. It stopped 20 feet from the hut, and a man got out. He wore a suit. Not a funeral suit or a church suit, but the kind of suit that meant money, charcoal gray, perfectly fitted, with a blue tie that probably cost more than our entire auction bid. He was maybe 40, with the kind of tan that came from golf courses and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning," he called out, picking his way across the uneven ground in shoes that definitely weren't made for prairie dirt. "I'm looking for the property owner?" I straightened up, wiping my hands on my jeans. Behind me, I heard the hut door creak. Toby had heard the car too. "That's me," I said. His smile flickered, just for a second. He'd been expecting an adult. "I see. And your parents?" "Not here." I didn't elaborate. I'd learned in the last few weeks that the less information you volunteered, the harder it was for adults to find reasons you couldn't do something. He recovered smoothly, extending his hand as he closed the distance between us. "Marcus Thorne. I'm with EtherGrid Industries. We're a tech development firm based out of Denver." His handshake was firm, practiced. "I happened to be in the area and noticed your property had recently changed hands. I wanted to introduce myself. I'd never heard of EtherGrid Industries. I didn't know anyone who happened to be in the area, of a place 40 miles from the nearest real town. But I nodded, waiting. "This is quite a project you've taken on," he said, glancing at the blue shell with an expression that was probably supposed to look sympathetic, but came off as condescending. "Old Quonset huts like this, they're almost impossible to renovate properly. Structural issues, rust, no rail foundation. Most people end up spending more on repairs than the property's worth." "We're managing," I said. "I'm sure you are." He pulled out a leather portfolio from inside his jacket, the kind with a zipper that whispered money. "The thing is, EtherGrid is always looking for land in developing areas. We're working on several infrastructure projects in this region, and your property happens to sit in an interesting location." He opened the portfolio and pulled out a paper, handing it to me. It was a check already filled out. Made out to current owner, Route 71 mile marker 843. The amount line read, $50,000. My hands went numb. $50,000. That was college money. That was a real apartment in town, food for years, Toby's braces he needed but we couldn't afford. That was everything we didn't have. "That's a generous offer for property in this condition," Thorne continued, his voice smooth as oil. "More than generous, really. You could take that money, find a proper place in town. No more dealing with rust and leaks and, he gestured vaguely at the prairie around us. Isolation. I looked at the check. The numbers swam in front of my eyes. Behind me, I heard Toby's sharp intake of breath. He'd seen it too. Then I looked at Marcus Thorne, at his expensive suit and his rehearsed sympathy and his eyes that were calculating something I couldn't quite name. A man in a suit like that doesn't drive 40 miles to buy a junk heap on a dirt road unless that junk heap is worth more than $50,000. Why? I asked. I'm sorry. Why do you want it? There's nothing here. You said so yourself. It's a structural nightmare, no foundation, middle of nowhere. So why? His smile tightened. Just a fraction. As I said, infrastructure projects. Regional development. The specifics are proprietary, but… No, I said. The word hung in the air between us. No. He said it like he'd never heard the word before. Like it was a foreign concept that needed translation. Thank you for the offer, but we're not interested in selling. Something shifted in his expression. The friendly mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something else underneath, something cold and sharp. Then the smile was back, brighter than before. Well, he said, folding the check and sliding it back into his portfolio. If you change your mind, I'll be in the area. Here's my card. He handed me a business card, heavy stock, embossed lettering. Then he walked back to his sedan, his shoes leaving perfect prints in the dust. I watched him drive away, and I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear. From the certainty that I'd just made either the best decision of my life or the worst. Toby came up beside me. Steph? That was $50,000. I know. Why did you say no? I looked down at the card in my hand. Marcus Thorne, Senior Acquisition Specialist, EtherGrid Industries. A Denver phone number and an email address. Because men in expensive suits don't offer you $50,000 for something worthless, I said. They offer you $50,000 for something worth a lot more. I didn't notice it at first. We didn't have much that ran on electricity. My phone was a prepaid flip phone I kept off most of the time to save battery, and Toby's Nintendo had died 2 days after we moved in. But 3 days after Marcus Thorne's visit, I was inside the hut trying to call the county office about getting the water turned on when I realized my phone had no signal. Not low signal. Not one bar. Just nothing. The little icon where the bars should be was completely empty, like the phone had forgotten what a cell tower was. I walked outside, holding the phone up like an idiot, watching the bars flicker back to life the moment I crossed the threshold. Full signal. 4 bars. I stepped back inside. Nothing. Outside. 4 bars. Inside. Dead. Toby, I called. Bring me your phone. He'd been using it as a flashlight, the battery somehow still clinging to life. He handed it to me and I watched the same thing happen. The moment we crossed into the hut, both phones went dark. Not dead, the batteries were fine, but like someone had flipped a switch and cut them off from the world. That's weird, Toby said. Weird didn't cover it. I spent the next hour testing everything electronic we had. My old iPod, dead inside, working outside. The battery-powered lantern worked fine, but Toby's digital watch stopped the second he walked through the door. Even the cheap radio I'd bought at the gas station just hissed with static inside the hut, but picked up stations perfectly when I stood in the doorway. Something about this place killed signals. All of them. I started searching. If this was happening, maybe my Aunt Margot had known about it. Maybe that's why she'd bought this place to begin with. I went through the boxes we'd been avoiding, the ones stacked in the corners filled with water-damaged papers and junk. Most of it was useless. Old farm equipment catalogs, receipts from the 1980s, a collection of Reader's Digests that had fossilized into a solid brick. Then, wedged behind the broken wood stove, I found a metal box. It was dented and scratched but intact, the kind of fireproof lockbox people kept important documents in. The lock had rusted through. When I pried it open with a screwdriver, the hinges screamed like they were angry about being disturbed. Inside were notebooks. 5 of them, spiral-bound, filled with my aunt's cramped handwriting. The dates on the covers ran from 1987 to 2003. I opened the first one, and a newspaper clipping fell out. The headline read, "Local woman claims property blocks all radio signals, scientists baffled." The article was from the Hastings Tribune, dated May 1987. It was about Aunt Margot. She'd bought the land after some geological survey mentioned an anomaly in the area, a place where compasses spun uselessly and radio signals died. The article quoted a university professor saying it was probably just iron deposits or underground mineral formations, nothing special. The tone suggested they thought my aunt was eccentric at best, crazy at worst. I started reading the journals. Margot had been a ham radio operator, someone who talked to people across the country using radio waves. She'd heard about this spot from another operator and became obsessed. She'd bought the land, built the Quonset hut, and spent years documenting what she called the dead zone. 2 acres of perfect silence, she wrote in an entry from 1989. No AM, no FM, no shortwave. Cell phones don't work here. I tested with Jim's new Motorola. It's like the Earth itself is shielding this spot. The government would kill for a place like this. A natural Faraday cage. I didn't know what a Faraday cage was, but I kept reading. The later entries got stranger. Margot wrote about people coming around, asking questions. Military contractors. Tech companies. She'd turned them all away. In 2001, she wrote, "They're getting more aggressive. Offered me $200,000 today. I said no. This place is too important. If they get their hands on it, it'll be buried under concrete and classified forever. Nobody will remember there was ever a place on Earth where you could be truly disconnected." The last entry was dated October 2003, 2 months before she died. "I'm getting older. I need to make sure this place goes to someone who'll understand what it means. Not just land, not just a structure, but proof that there are still places the modern world can't touch. I'm leaving it to Stephanie. She's only 5 now, but she's smart, sharp. When she's old enough, maybe she'll figure out what I couldn't, how to protect something precious when everyone wants to take it from you." I sat on the cold concrete floor, surrounded by my aunt's life's work, and felt the weight of understanding settle over me like snow. Marcus Thorne hadn't come here for infrastructure development. He'd come here because this place was impossible. A natural dead zone in an age where everything was connected, tracked, monitored. A place where signals went to die. And somehow, we'd bought it for $10. The water pump started working on a Tuesday. I'd spent 3 days watching YouTube videos on my phone outside the hut, learning how to prime an old well pump, and finally got it running. The water came out rust-colored at first, then cleared to something that looked almost drinkable. Toby and I celebrated like we'd struck oil. Running water meant we could wash dishes, take actual baths in the big utility sink I'd found, maybe even think about staying here long-term. By Friday, we were both sick. It started with Toby. He woke me up in the middle of the night, his face pale in the lantern light, saying his stomach hurt. An hour later, he was vomiting into a bucket while I held his hair back and tried not to panic. By morning, I had it too, cramps that felt like someone twisting a knife in my gut, dizziness that made the curved walls of the hut spin. We spent 2 days barely able to move. I crawled outside to my phone and called the health clinic in town. The nurse said it sounded like bacterial contamination, told me to buy bottled water, and stop using the well until we could get it tested. Testing cost money we didn't have, so I bought gallon jugs at the gas station and tried not to think about how we'd been drinking poison. On Monday, I went to check the pump. That's when I found the bleach bottle. It was wedged behind the pump housing, half empty, the cap sitting in the dirt nearby. Commercial-grade bleach, the industrial kind you don't just find lying around. Someone had poured it down our well. Someone had deliberately poisoned our water supply. I stood there holding that bottle, my hands shaking with something that wasn't sickness anymore. It was rage. That afternoon, Sheriff Dawson showed up. He was a thick man in his 50s with a mustache that looked like it had its own zip code and a way of talking that made everything sound reasonable even when it wasn't. He pulled up in his cruiser around 3 o'clock, took his time getting out, adjusted his belt like he was settling in for a performance. "Afternoon," he said, not quite looking at me. "Got a complaint about this property. Code violations. Health and safety concerns." "What kind of concerns?" I asked. He pulled out a small notebook, flipped through it like he was reading charges. "Structures not up to residential code. No proper sewage system. No electrical inspection. Word is you've got minors living here without adult supervision." He finally looked at me. "That true?" "I'm 18, I lied. My birthday wasn't for another 2 months, but I was betting he wouldn't check." "That right." He tucked the notebook away. "Even so, this place isn't fit for habitation. County could condemn it. Then you'd have to leave anyway, and you'd have a condemnation on your record. Makes it harder to rent somewhere else." "We're fixing it up," I said. "We've got running water. We're working on the electrical." "You got permits for that electrical work?" I didn't answer. He sighed like he was doing me a favor. "Look, I'm not trying to make your life harder. But people are concerned. Your kid's living in a metal shack in the middle of nowhere. That's not normal. That's not safe. There are resources available, foster care, group homes." "We're fine," I said, my voice harder than I meant it to be. "For now, maybe. But winter's coming. You think you can heat this place when it's 10 below? You think you can survive out here when the roads ice over and you can't get to town?" He shifted his weight, and I saw something in his expression that might have been genuine concern, or might have been something else. "Someone made an offer on this place, didn't they? Good offer too, I'd bet. Maybe you should take it. Get somewhere warm. Somewhere with walls that don't leak." And there it was. The real reason he was here. This wasn't about code violations or concern for our safety. This was about moving us out. "Who complained?" I asked. "Anonymous tip. From someone in a suit? Someone from Denver, maybe." His expression closed off like a door slamming. "I'm giving you 2 weeks to get permits and bring this structure up to code, or I'm filing a condemnation order." "That's not a threat. That's procedure." He headed back to his cruiser, then paused. "You seem like a smart kid. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I watched him drive away, dust rising behind his car like smoke. Toby came out to stand beside me, still pale from being sick. "What are we going to do?" he asked. I looked at the bleach bottle in my hand, then at the hut behind us. Our hut. The only thing in the world that was actually ours. "We're going to fight," I said. I found Ray Hutchins by accident, which is probably the only way anyone found Ray Hutchins. I was at the library in Hastings, using their computer to research Faraday cages and signal-blocking technology, trying to understand what we actually had. The librarian, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, kept glancing over at my screen. Finally, she walked over. "You interested in radio signals?" she asked. "Sort of," I said, not wanting to explain. "There used to be a man around here who knew everything about that stuff. Ham radio operator. Worked for NASA back in the day, before he retired out here." She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "He knew your aunt, actually. Margot Adams. They used to talk shop about radio frequencies and dead zones, and all that technical business I never understood." My heart kicked up. Is he still around? Ray Hutchins. Lives about 15 miles west of you, off Highway 6. Big satellite dish in his yard. You can't miss it. Fair warning though, he doesn't like visitors. Hasn't left his property in about 5 years. I drove out there the next morning, leaving Toby with a neighbor I'd bribed with $20. The satellite dish was visible from half a mile away, a massive white bowl pointed at the sky like it was listening for God. The property itself was a small farmhouse surrounded by antenna towers of various heights, all of them bristling with equipment I couldn't identify. I knocked on the door. No answer. Knocked again. Still nothing. I knew Margot Adams. I called out. She left me the property on Route 71. The one with the dead zone. The door opened so fast I jumped. The man standing there was tall and thin, maybe 70, with wild white hair and eyes that were sharp despite his age. He wore a flannel shirt with a pocket protector full of pens. "You're the niece," he said. It wasn't a question. "Stephanie. And you're Ray." He studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Get in here before someone sees you." The inside of his house looked like a Radio Shack had exploded. Every surface was covered with equipment, oscilloscopes, radio transceivers, coils of cable, circuit boards in various states of assembly. The walls were lined with charts and graphs I couldn't begin to understand. "Margot told me about you," Ray said, clearing newspapers off a chair so I could sit. "Said if anything happened to her, you'd end up with the property. Wasn't sure you'd be smart enough to keep it." He looked at me with those sharp eyes. "You turned down EtherGrid's offer?" "How did you know about that?" "Because they came to me first about 3 years ago. Offered me $200,000 for my land. When I said no, they started making my life difficult. Zoning complaints, property tax errors that needed correcting. My well got contaminated too. Took me 6 months to prove it wasn't an accident." He sat down across from me. "They want my antenna array. But more than that, they want your land."
"Why?"
"What's so special about a place where electronics don't work?" Ray laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. "That's exactly what makes it special. You know how many satellites are watching us right now? How many signals are bouncing through this room? Cell towers, GPS, Wi-Fi, government surveillance, corporate data mining. We're swimming in electromagnetic noise every second of every day." He leaned forward. "Your land is the only place for 300 miles where none of that exists. A true dead zone. Natural, permanent, and completely off the grid. So what? People want to get away from their phones." "Not people. Governments. Corporations. The kind of entities that need places to have conversations nobody can intercept. Places to store data nobody can hack. Places to exist without leaving a digital footprint." He pulled out a folder from beneath a stack of magazines and handed it to me. EtherGrid isn't a tech development company. They're a defense contractor. They build unhackable servers and secure communication systems for people who can afford to pay millions for privacy. I opened the folder. Inside were printed articles about EtherGrid, government contracts, Pentagon connections, projects with names that were half redacted. There was a photograph of Marcus Thorne shaking hands with someone whose face I recognized from the news but couldn't place. "They want to build a server farm on your land," Ray continued. "A place where data can exist completely disconnected from any network. Unhackable because it's physically impossible to access remotely. That's worth billions. And you bought it for $10. The weight of it hit me all at once. This wasn't just about a piece of land. This was about something people would kill for. "They poisoned our water," I said quietly. "They sent the sheriff to threaten us with condemnation. That's just the beginning. They'll escalate. They always do." Ray stood up and walked to his window, looking out at his antenna array. "Your aunt fought them for 16 years. She died before they could break her. Now, they think a couple of kids will be easier to push around. What do I do?" He turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he smiled. "You do what Margot would have done. You make yourself too difficult to eliminate quietly. You go public. You make that land mean something to people so EtherGrid can't just bulldoze it without everyone watching." He walked over to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are Margot's old contacts. Journalists, environmental groups, historical preservation societies. You make noise. You make them notice." I took the envelope, feeling like I was accepting something heavier than paper. "And Stephanie," Ray said as I headed for the door, "get yourself a lawyer. A good one, because they're not going to stop coming." The letter came on a Wednesday. Legal-sized envelope, certified mail, the kind that requires a signature. I knew before I opened it that everything was about to get worse. Notice of emergency eminent domain proceedings. The header read. The county, in partnership with a private development firm, EtherGrid wasn't mentioned by name, but their fingerprints were all over it, was claiming the land for critical infrastructure development in the public interest. We had 72 hours to vacate. After that, they'd remove us by force. I called the lawyer Ray had recommended, a woman named Patricia Chern who took cases pro bono for people who couldn't afford her. She listened to everything, then delivered the news I didn't want to hear. They're using an emergency provision that's almost impossible to fight in 72 hours, she said. I can file an injunction, but it'll take at least a week to get a hearing. In the meantime, legally, they can remove you from the property. What if we don't leave? There was a pause on the other end. Then it becomes a law enforcement issue. Sheriff's department, possibly state police. They'll remove you physically. Stephanie, I know this isn't what you want to hear, but sometimes the smart play is tactical retreat. We regroup. We fight this in court. No, I said. We're not leaving. I hung up and looked at Toby, who'd been listening to the whole conversation. He was 13 now. We'd celebrated his birthday with gas station cupcakes 2 weeks earlier, and he'd gotten taller, but he still had that look in his eyes that said he trusted me to have a plan, even when I didn't. What are we going to do? He asked. I looked around the blue shell. We'd been here 4 months. We'd patched the leaks, cleaned the rust, made it something close to livable. It was ours. The only thing in the world that was actually ours. We're going to make it really hard for them to take it, I said. Ray showed up that afternoon with his pickup truck full of supplies. He didn't ask if I was sure about this. He just started unloading.
Chains.
Padlocks. 2x4s. A welder he taught me how to use in about 15 minutes. By nightfall, we'd reinforced the door with a steel crossbar and welded the hinges so they couldn't be removed from the outside. They'll bring cutting equipment, Ray warned. Then we'll slow them down until the press gets here. I'd spent the morning making calls from Ray's house. Every journalist in Margot's envelope, every news station within 100 miles, every environmental group that might care about a teenage girl fighting a defense contractor. Most of them hadn't answered, but 3 had. 3 said they'd send someone out if things actually went down. 3 was enough. We stockpiled supplies, water, non-perishable food, batteries. Ray brought us a ham radio, one of the few things that actually worked inside the dead zone, he explained, because it operated on different frequencies. He showed me how to use it, how to broadcast on emergency channels if things went sideways. The 72 hours felt like 72 minutes. They came at dawn on Saturday. I woke to the sound of vehicles, multiple vehicles, pulling up outside. Through the grimy window, I could see Sheriff Dawson's cruiser, 2 county vehicles, and a black SUV I recognized as Marcus Thorne's. Behind them was a flatbed truck with a small excavator strapped to it. Toby sat up, his face pale. They brought a bulldozer. Not a bulldozer. Excavator. Different thing. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Get on the radio. Tell Ray they're here. There was a knock on the door. Professional. 3 sharp raps. Stephanie Adams, Sheriff Dawson's voice called out. This is your final notice to vacate the premises. You have 5 minutes to come out voluntarily, or we will enter by force. I walked to the door, but didn't open it. This is an illegal seizure. We have legal counsel. The press has been notified. The press? That was Thorne's voice, sharp with irritation. This is a legal proceeding. You're trespassing on property that's been claimed under eminent domain. The injunction hasn't been heard yet. You're the ones trespassing. There was silence outside. Then muffled conversation I couldn't make out. Finally, Dawson again. Miss Adams, I'm trying to do this the easy way. Don't make me do it the hard way. Then don't make us defend our home, I called back. I heard the scrape of metal. They were bringing equipment to the door. Toby's hands were shaking as he held the radio. waiting for Ray's response. Through the window, I saw someone setting up a cutting torch. "This is insane," Toby whispered. Maybe it was. But we'd been pushed out of everywhere else. There was nowhere left to go but forward. The cutting torch sparked to life, with a hiss that sounded like a dragon waking up. They were coming in, and we were going to make them work for every inch. The cutting torch had been working on the door for 20 minutes when I remembered something from Aunt Margot's journals. An entry from 1994, written in her cramped handwriting, installed the amplification system today. If the natural dead zone is a shield, this makes it a weapon. Never thought I'd need it. Hope I never do. I'd found the system 2 weeks ago while clearing out the back corner, a panel hidden behind the old water heater, covered in dust and connected to a series of copper coils that ran through the walls like veins. I hadn't understood what it was. Now, watching the sheriff's equipment lined up outside like an invading army, I understood exactly what Aunt Margot had built. "Toby," I said, pulling him away from the window where he'd been watching the torch eat through our reinforced door. "Remember those copper coils in the walls? The weird ones that go all the way around? They're not weird. They're an antenna system. Margot built it to amplify the dead zone." I was talking fast, my mind racing through the journal entries I'd memorized. The natural anomaly blocks signals in here, but the coils can project that blocking effect outward. His eyes went wide. "Like a signal jammer? Bigger than that. Like a signal kill switch for everything electronic within range." I ran to the panel and yanked off the cover. Inside was a mess of old wiring, switches, and what looked like a car battery connected to a hand crank generator. She never used it because it would have attracted too much attention. But we don't have anything left to lose. Through the door, I heard Dawson shouting, "Almost through. Get ready to move in." I looked at the switches. 3 of them, labeled in Margot's handwriting, primary, secondary, and full spectrum. My hand hovered over the first one. "Steph, are you sure about this?" Toby asked. I wasn't. But the torch was cutting through steel, and Marcus Thorne was outside waiting to take everything we had. I flipped the primary switch. Nothing happened for 3 seconds. Then I heard it, a low hum that seemed to come from the walls themselves, rising in pitch until it was almost painful. Outside, someone shouted. The sound of the cutting torch stopped. I ran to the window. The torch had gone dead, its flame extinguished. The operator was shaking it, checking connections, but it wasn't the torch that was broken. Sheriff Dawson was pulling out his radio, pressing the talk button. Nothing. He tried his cell phone. Nothing. One of the deputies was staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Marcus Thorne was standing by his SUV, and even from this distance, I could see the rage on his face. "It's working," Toby breathed. But it wasn't enough. They still had the excavator, which ran on diesel and didn't need electronics. I watched as one of the county workers climbed up into the cab. The engine turned over once, twice, then died. He tried again. Nothing. The excavator's modern engine was controlled by a computer system, and that computer had just stopped existing. "Miss Adams." Dawson was at the door again, his voice carrying an edge I hadn't heard before. "What the hell did you just do?" I opened the small window we'd left uncovered. Turned on my security system. "You're jamming law enforcement communications. That's a federal offense." "I'm not jamming anything. This is a natural geological phenomenon. You're the ones who decided to stage a siege on top of an electromagnetic anomaly." I kept my voice steady even though my heart was hammering. "Maybe you should have done better research." Marcus Thorne pushed forward, his expensive suit looking rumpled now, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Turn it off. Now." "Or what? You'll bulldoze us?" "Your bulldozer doesn't work. Your radios don't work. Your phones don't work. Nothing electronic works within 100 yards of this property right now, and it won't work until I decide to turn it off." "You're bluffing," he said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. I flipped the secondary switch. The hum intensified. Through the window, I watched as every vehicle within sight simultaneously died, dashboard lights flickering out, engines cutting off mid-idle. Dawson's cruiser went dark. Thorne's SUV went silent. Even the digital watches on the deputy's wrists stopped ticking. Someone swore. Another person was frantically trying to restart their vehicle. Thorne stood frozen, staring at the hut like it had just revealed itself to be something other than a building. "This is impossible," he said. "No," I said. "This is mine." Ray's voice crackled over the ham radio behind me, the only electronic device still functioning. "Stephanie, 3 news vans just pulled up on the main road. They can't get any closer because their vehicles died. They're walking in with cameras." I looked at Thorne through the window. "You wanted to take this property quietly. Too late for that now. The press is here, and every piece of equipment you brought just died on camera. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to walk away, you're going to drop the eminent domain claim, and you're going to leave us alone. Because if you don't, I'm going to tell every reporter out there exactly what you were trying to build here and why." His face had gone red. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. $1 billion defense contract, right? Unhackable servers for people who need to hide from their own governments? Yeah, I know exactly what I'm interfering with. And I'm keeping it out of your hands." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Thorne turned and started walking toward the road, his useless phone still in his hand. Dawson looked between us and the approaching journalists, then followed. I watched them go, my hand still on the switches, until Toby tapped my shoulder. "You can turn it off now," he said quietly. I flipped the switches back. The hum died. In the distance, I heard engines turning over, vehicles coming back to life. But Thorne and his excavator were already retreating, and the journalists were spreading out across our property with cameras raised. We'd won, at least for today. The lawsuit took 6 months to settle. 6 months of lawyers and depositions and journalists who kept calling wanting follow-up stories about the teenagers who shut down a defense contractor with a metal hut. Patricia Chun worked miracles. She got the eminent domain claim dismissed, got restraining orders against EtherGrid, and most importantly, she got us to the negotiating table with leverage. Thorne wanted the land. We weren't selling, but Patricia found the middle ground. A conservation easement, she explained over coffee at the diner in town. Toby and I sat across from her, trying to understand legal terms that sounded like another language. You retain ownership. You live there, you control access, you make all decisions about the property. But you agree never to develop it commercially, never to sell it to a private entity, and to preserve its unique electromagnetic characteristics in perpetuity. "And they pay us for that?" I asked. "They pay you $3.2 million for that." I'd been taking a sip of coffee. I choked on it. Toby's eyes went so wide I thought they might fall out of his head. "Million," he whispered. Patricia smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in 6 months. They wanted it quiet. They wanted it done. And they wanted to make sure you'd never talk about what they tried to do. The easement gives them plausible deniability. They can claim they were always interested in preservation, not exploitation. You get financial security and legal protection. It's not perfect, but it's the best deal you're going to get. I signed the papers 3 weeks later. The money hit our account on a Tuesday morning in March, almost exactly 1 year after we'd bought the blue shell for $10. The restoration took another year. I hired architects who specialized in sustainable design, engineers who understood historical preservation, contractors who didn't laugh when I said I wanted to keep the original Quonset structure intact. We cleaned every inch of rust, reinforced the frame with new steel, and added a proper foundation. We installed solar panels that worked outside the dead zone, running power lines that stopped just at the threshold. Inside remained untouched by modern signals, a pocket of silence in a noisy world. Outside, we built a modern addition, a glass-walled structure that housed a real kitchen, bathrooms with actual plumbing, bedrooms with windows that let in prairie light. The blue paint we kept. Not the peeling, rusted blue of abandonment, but a fresh cobalt that gleamed in the sun like water. The blue shell, restored. Ray helped with the technical work, installing a proper version of Margot's amplification system with fail-safes and controls. Just in case anyone else gets ideas, he said. He taught me how to maintain it, how to adjust the range, how to use it responsibly. He moved into the guest room in our new addition 6 months after we finished construction. Said he was tired of living alone. I enrolled Toby in the high school in Hastings. He joined the robotics club, made friends who came out to visit, and marveled at the place where their phones didn't work. He stopped having nightmares about Derek. Started talking about college, about engineering programs, about futures that seemed possible now. I took online classes at community college. Business administration. Legal studies. Things that would help me protect what we'd built. Patricia said I had good instincts for it. Said I should consider law school someday. On the anniversary of the day we bought the property, I stood outside as the sun set over the prairie, painting everything gold and orange and impossible. Toby came out to stand beside me, taller now, his voice deeper, but still my little brother. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Saying no to that first offer? We could have taken the money and run. I looked at the blue shell, our home, gleaming blue against the endless sky. Looked at the prairie grass moving in waves like an ocean. Looked at the place where we'd learned that sometimes the things the world considers worthless are the things worth fighting for. Not for a second, I said. Inside, Ray was making dinner. The solar panels outside hummed with stored energy. The well pump ran clean and clear. And in the center of it all, in the heart of the original Quonset hut, there was still that pocket of perfect silence. A place where signals went to die and 2 kids had learned to live. We walked back inside together, and I locked the door behind us. Not to keep the world out, but because we finally had something worth protecting. We had a home, and nobody was ever taking that from us again.